Hey there, storm chasers, political storm chasers. I'm John Small from PoliticalStorm.com. Today we're going to talk about the difference between a caucus and a primary. Now, this is a very confusing thing because we hear about the Iowa caucus. That happened on Monday, February 1st. And then you hear about things like the primaries, like they might have in your state, but they had one in New Hampshire on Tuesday, February the 9th. Coming up here in the next few weeks, we've got a lot of these on the way. So let's talk about the difference between a caucus and a primary. And we're going to get this right from Wikipedia because these guys, don't they know everything? They sure seem to anyway. So right here it says the caucus versus primary. The electoral process to nominate a candidate for presidential election is usually called the primaries. But there are two different systems that states can use, caucuses and primaries. Unlike a primary, where residents simply cast their ballot like a regular election, a caucus is a local gathering where voters openly decide which candidate to support. The caucus format favors candidates who have a dedicated and organized following because a small band of devoted volunteers can exert an outsized influence in the open setting of a caucus. States get to choose whether they want to hold a primary or a caucus. Most states hold primaries, but there are states like Iowa, Louisiana, Minnesota, and Maine that use the caucus system. Now, I went to my very first ever caucus back on Monday, February the 1st, and I made a podcast called The 40-Year-Old Caucus Virgin because I'd never been to one before. It really amazed me and impressed me, first of all, at the difference between the Republican caucus and the Democratic caucus. Even though they're both a caucus, they're both held completely differently. The Republican caucus, the people who were going to be casting their votes, and you could even register that day, but once you knew that you were qualified, they gave you an official ballot, which was a slip of paper. You'd sit at a table, you'd fill out the form, and you'd hand all those in, and they'd count them up, and then they announced how many people voted for each candidate. Before they even got to the voting, each candidate had the opportunity to have somebody speak on their behalf to inform people and say, I'm here for this candidate, and this is why you should vote for them. So that's kind of how they do it in Iowa, in the Republican caucus. And I went to the one in a little town called Larchwood, Iowa, population 880. Then right after that, I went right up the street to the Democrat caucus, and the Democrat caucus was completely different. The way they do it, at least at the one in Larchwood, Iowa, for the Iowa caucus, it's an open caucus where there were no slips of paper, but it was a guy in the middle of the room saying, if you'd like to caucus for Hillary Clinton, stand in this corner. If you'd like to caucus for Bernie Sanders, stand in this corner. And if you'd like to caucus for Martin O'Malley, stand in this corner. And if you're undecided, come out in the middle, and then they're going to try to draw you into the corner. So that's the way it works. It's different. Instead of the slip of paper and the secrecy of, your neighbor not necessarily knowing who you're voting for, in this scenario, you literally have to stand in the corner for the candidate. And then the people that are in the center, they try to woo them over. It's like, Red Rover, send your delegates over. It was really interesting to me to see that, which is completely different than a primary. A primary, you walk into a booth. Sometimes it's a digital, however they do it in your state. Some is digital, some it's, punch the ballot, whatever it is, fill in the circle, fill in the oval, and you make your choice. But the voting in a primary or a caucus, we'll get back to Wikipedia now. It says that a caucus, members of a political party meet in person at an appointed time and location to discuss the candidates and to debate their merits. The voting for candidates happens either by raising hands or by separating into groups, with the votes being counted manually by counting the number of supporters for each candidate. In contrast, a primary is much like a general election or a regular election, depending on the type of primary. Those eligible to vote cast a secret ballot. The caucus system was the original way in which political parties chose candidates. However, people began to feel that the secret ballot was fairer, I think it should say more fair, more democratic system. So in the beginning of the 20th century, states began to move to the primary system. Now let's talk about delegates. At the heart of the electoral process is the system of delegates. Each state has a certain number of delegates that represent the state at the national convention of either political party, Democrat or Republican. It is at this event that the party's presidential nominee is chosen. The delegates of each state are awarded to one of the presidential candidates, and the candidate with the most number of delegates on his or her side wins the nomination. Some states use a winner-take-all approach, and award all of their delegates to the winner of the caucus or primary in that state. Some states award delegates in proportion to the percentage of votes the candidate receive. In general, states decide whether to hold a primary or a caucus, and this decision applies to both parties. But in some cases, for example, Washington, there's a variance between the process used by Republicans and Democrat parties in the same state. Another difference is that there are some delegates called unpledged delegates in the Republican system and super delegates in the Democratic system who are not bound by the results of the caucus or primary in their state. They are free to vote for the candidate of their choosing. Confused yet? Now let's talk about primaries. Closed primaries. People may vote in a primary only if it's for their party, if they're registered members of that party. Independents cannot participate in closed primaries. Now they have a thing called semi-closed. As in closed primaries, registered party members can vote on their own in the party's primary. However, it allows unaffiliated voters to participate as well. Depending on the state, independents can either make their choice for the party privately inside the voting booth or publicly by registering with either party on election day. And then an open primary is where registered voters may vote in any primary regardless of his or her own party affiliation. When voters do not register with a party before the primary, it's called a pick-a-party primary because the voter can select which party's primary he or she wishes to vote on election day. Because of the open nature of this system, a practice known as rating may occur. Rating consists of voters of one party crossing over and voting in the primary of another party, effectively allowing the party to help choose the opposition's candidate. Now, the theory is that opposing party members vote for the weakest candidate on that ticket, hoping to give their own party an advantage in the general election. An example of this can be seen in 1998 in Vermont, the senatorial primary there, the nomination of Fred Tuttle as the Republican candidate in the general election. So now let's talk about the semi-open. A registered voter need not publicly declare which party the primary that they will vote in before entering the booth. When voters identify themselves in the election officials, they must request a party-specific ballot. Only one ballot is cast by each voter. In many states with semi-open primaries, election officials or poll workers from their respective parties record each voter's choice of party and provide access to this information. The primary difference between a semi-open and open primary is the use of a party-specific ballot. In a semi-open primary, a public declaration in front of the election judges is made, and a party-specific ballot is given to the voters to cast. Certain states that use the open primary format may print a single ballot, and then a voter must choose on the ballot itself which political party candidates they will select for a contested office. Now, you've heard about a runoff, right? A primary in which the ballot is not restricted to one party and the top two candidates advance to the general election regardless of party affiliation. A runoff differs from a primary in that a second round is only needed if no candidate attains a majority in the first round. And then finally, mixed systems. In West Virginia, where state law allows parties to determine whether primaries are open to independents, Republican primaries are open to independents, while Democratic primaries were closed. However, on April 1st in 2007, West Virginia's Democratic Party opened its voting to allow individuals who are not affiliated with any existing recognized party to participate in the election process. So now everybody's invited. So that's going to be the difference between a caucus and a primary. Did I clear that up, or did I confuse you more? Because I'm going to tell you, I read it and I'm still confused. But I do want to tell you something. The things that I find very interesting are the superdelegates. When you go back and look at that, superdelegates, that's just in the Democratic system. They're not bound by the results of the caucus or primary in their state. So superdelegates, basically, they say, hey, once you're a superdelegate, you have these superpowers where you can choose whoever you want to choose, no matter what your state told you to do. In the Republican side, they're called unpledged delegates. Those are the ones that are most interesting to me. Now, let's get back on track. We've got another couple of fun things coming up here in the very near future. On Saturday, the 20th of February, the Nevada Democratic Caucus and the South Carolina Republican Primary and the Washington Republican Caucus. That's shortly followed by Tuesday, the 23rd, the Republican Nevada Caucus And then Saturday, February 27th, South Carolina's Democratic primary. Then we've got really, really big stuff happening on Tuesday, March the 1st. It is Super Tuesday, and we've got Alabama, and it's the Republican caucus in Alaska, American Samoa, Democratic caucus, Arkansas, Colorado caucus, Georgia, Massachusetts, Minnesota caucus, North Dakota caucus for Republicans, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Virginia, and the Wyoming Republican caucus. All of those happening on Super Tuesday, and be sure to be there for halftime because I think Lady Gaga, I believe, is going to sing. Wait, what was that? That was the football game? That was a different Super? Never mind. So that doesn't happen on Super Tuesday. I was incorrect. On Saturday, March the 5th, we've got a couple others, and then it's all rolling in. We're going to have a whole lot of them. Now, if we have not had a caucus or primary yet in your state, be sure to go to politicalstorm.com and take a look at the calendar so you can be involved, and make sure you get involved. Because it's your right. It's your voice. You have the opportunity to make a difference. So get out there, get involved, and have some fun with it. And be sure to tell your friends about politicalstorm.com. If there's a specific topic you'd like me to discuss in upcoming podcasts, please reach out to me and let me know. I'll give you my email address. It's me@bigjohnsmall.com. For politicalstorm.com, I'm John Small.